Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Super Paranormal Chronicles. Today, I am more than delighted to have Jamie Waggoner with us. Jamie is an author, a pagan high priestess, a witch, community leader, and creative professional. Jamie, welcome and thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you so much, Lee. I'm really delighted to be here.
So, as we've just been talking offline, I know absolutely nothing about paganism. I'm going to put my hands up and say I know nothing. So let's jump straight in, and if you can explain to me what paganism is, and then lead into what does a pagan high priestess does, please.
Sure, I would be pleased to do that. So, like many spiritualities, religions, things like that, there's not just one thing that's paganism. There's lots of different variations. And people believe a lot of different things. Myself, personally, I'm what they call a hard polytheist. That means I believe in all the gods in the world throughout time and throughout belief systems, but I choose to interact with just a small few of them that really resonate with my and within paganism, there are differing beliefs. Some folks, they see gods as archetypes. They see, mythology as a pathway to personal improvement and things like that. So it can really vary. And I think, when most people think of someone that's a pagan or a witch, they maybe immediately think of like Wicca. But
Yeah.
that's just one thing in a very, very broad category of belief systems. And mostly I work with gods from Greek mythology, although I do work with some other pantheons, a Welsh pantheon and some others. And within paganism, there are some folks that like to try and reconstruct what pagan belief systems might have been like and what pagan practices might have been in ancient times. They're called reconstructionists. I'm not one of those. I'm very eclectic. I do research a lot because I write about the gods and about how to work with them, how to practice with them. However, I have a lot of respect for ancient ways, ancient belief systems, but I also try to incorporate sort of my modern take on them. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, awesome. So, how did you get involved with paganism?
Well, so back in the late 1990s when I was in college, I'm totally going to date myself now, but I have a degree in philosophy, and I majored in philosophy. And for my final thesis project, I decided to write a paper about re-emerging goddess traditions and goddess groups and circles that were forming at that time. And back in those days, there really was kind of a resurgence of this research, and a lot of women in particular were writing about it. And I was really studying it from an academic sort of perspective. My background is not in paganism. I was raised in the Christian church in a pretty conservative family. So for me, it was just academic interest. And then, I started researching more and more. And I mean, over a year or two, I just ended up falling in love with the goddess. It just really spoke to me and spoke to my heart. So
So,
yeah, I kind of came in through the academic door.
okay, so could you say, kind of hand on heart, yeah, as of this day, I'm going to follow the pagan faith? Or was it kind
Yeah.
of a blend in, from like weeks and months kind of thing?
Yeah, it's definitely a blend. Like I said, I have a Christian background, and being a philosophy major, I actually did study religion and Christianity quite a bit. And, there are a lot of women in the Bible that don't really get spoken about as much as some of the main narratives. So I think for me, that was kind of the bridge. I started studying like Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary Magdalene, and some of the other figures. And that just sort of bridged into these ancient goddesses.
Perfect. So, with it being, I'm going to be a little bit naive here. Does your
Great.
group call it? Thanks. Does your group kind of call itself a coven or just a pagan group? Is there a correct title
Yeah.
for?
Um, yeah, again, it just kind of varies. I used to belong to an organization called the Sisterhood of Avalon. That was the first pagan group that I belonged to. And I worked with that organization for about 15 years. And in that group, there was kind of like an overall sort of overarching like community standards and kind of community beliefs that we all sort of agreed to and united us. But locally, on a local level, we had we called it hearth circles. So basically, like, you know, and it would be what some people would call a coven. We got together and we did like full moon rituals, and we did, you know, we studied and tried to improve our magical skills and do all of those things. Now, now I don't actually belong to a specific organization. I'm pretty much a solo practitioner when it comes to a lot of things. Although I do have a collaborative teaching project with my really good friend Murphy, and it's called Way of the Weaver. And we teach magical technologies and ritual skills and things like that in sort of a open source environment. So we teach you the skills, and then you can take it and do whatever you like to do in your personal practice or form your own communities. And, you know, so yeah, we don't really call ourselves a coven in that way either. We basically call ourselves weavers. You know, because we're sort of weaving those strands of
Right,
magic and
right.
community and learning. So, you know, there's lots of different things. Within
Bec-
paganism, I think people like to sort of play around with terminology because there's room for that.
yeah, and one thing that I could say, like I said at the beginning, I'm very naive with regard to paganism. But if somebody said to me, oh, I'm a pagan, then you start going down the route of like, okay, is it like a druid festival? Are you dancing around a cauldron late at night? Because you don't know, you're just going to get these random thoughts in your head. So, what would be I'm going to say it, a typical day in the life of a pagan, sort of like with regard to your practices?
Yeah. Yeah, oh, that's a great question. And I think also people kind of maybe rely on what they see in film and media, right? So, you know, there certainly is like druid festivals and things like that. Myself, I'm not a druid, but you know, and there might even be dancing around cauldrons, right? But which would sounds like fun to me. But as
Yeah,
far as like a typical day, what this means for me is, you know, I magic is a big part of me. Like paganism and magic for me go together. So, you know, my witchcraft and magic practice is part of everything I do. And for me, it looks like waking up in the morning. When I go downstairs to get my coffee, I pass our house altar, which is dedicated to the Greek god Hades. And I sort of give him a nod. I might just give him a little kiss or a little moment there to recognize him every morning. I get dressed, and part of what I'm doing is I use like a special oil that I've blended for the properties of the herbs inside of it. And, you know, I'll do some sigil magic on my wrists for like protection and to go about my day. You know, and it also just, you know, a big part of most forms of paganism is trying to be in tune with the natural world. So I always try to make sure I step outside. I try to make, you know, take notice of what's blooming now, what's happening outside, what's going on, you know, and just sort of being in tune with that. In the evening, one of the things I do at the liminal time of day, so like sunset, twilight, I will go outside and either read or speak a short invocation to Hades, and I'll stomp the ground 3 times because that's an ancient tradition of how you get the attention of underworld gods. You stomp.
cool.
And I mean, it's a very simple thing, right? That's what an average day would be like.
Right. And you mentioned, about being a witch, and you mentioned about being magic. In this day and age, you mentioned those two words, and people are automatically going to go to Harry Potter because that's the thing now. So when you refer to magic, I'm only saying Harry Potter because my wife's a really big fan, but but when you refer to magic and being a witch, what does that mean to somebody like myself that doesn't know and doesn't understand these practices?
So, magic to me, it almost like once you learn to be attuned to it, it almost feels like another force that's active in the universe, somewhat like gravity, right? And if you're not really attuned to it, and you didn't really study it, you wouldn't know it's there. It's just acting in the background. And I think we live in, it's an animistic viewpoint. We live in a reactive, reflexive, constant exchange with everything around us. And when you can pay attention and tap in, that's the magic, right? There's a really famous quote that magic is the ability to change consciousness at will. So there's a lot of intention setting. There's a lot of, mindfulness practices that go into it. And just learning to work with energy and to get more in tune with what's happening around. I also think Harry Potter is wonderful. Read all the books, seen all the movies, done all the things. But I would say, honestly, if you're looking, like, if you want to know, like, what magic actually looks like in a visual sense, Doctor Strange is a better interpretation.
Oh, gotcha.
Because they're like spinning the sigils, and they're like spinning these sort of energetic portals to like do what they want. And a lot of magic is very much unseen. It's working with energies, and learning the properties of plants so that you can employ those as allies in your work. So yeah, I mean, I feel like um it's not enough to describe it, but it's one of those subtle things that's very hard to put into words. And yeah.
Yeah,
And
and that, go
go
on.
ahead.
So yeah, so I ask these kind of questions simply because, yeah, with my group being paranormal investigators, when you go, oh yeah, I'm a paranormal investigator, and people go like, I'm sorry, you what? You do what? And it's like,
Yeah,
you probably get the same kind of reaction when you go, oh yeah, yeah, I'm into paganism or I'm a witch, that kind of thing, and you
yeah,
kind of get the same response. People just look sideways at you and think like,
yeah.
is this person weird?
Well, I think a lot of people, when they hear paganism, kind of like you said, is this like a druid thing? I mean, I think their minds immediately go to like people that are LARPing,
Yeah,
right? But I'm not LARPing. I usually just wear normal clothes to do everything I do. And my gods are as real to me as someone would feel like the Christian God is, right? Or any of the Abrahamic religions, or the Buddha, or anybody else. My gods feel very real in that way. And witchcraft, it's interesting. Over my life, I have gone back and forth about identifying with that term, because it has such like heavy historical context to it, and a lot of times people don't understand, and they seem to feel like there's something malicious about it. There's some ill intent, and by and large, that is not the case. I mean, I can't speak for all humans, of course, but it's more of like what I told you, is it's a more animistic viewpoint of the world, and the fact that if we put our intentions out there, the world does respond.
right. And this is a term that I've heard before, but I would probably class you as a white witch compared to a dark witch. Would that be correct?
No,
Because
I
like
would say
white,
I would say I'm gray for sure.
yeah, because yeah,
Because
go on,
because
sorry.
there's not, I don't really think there's a binary like that,
Okay,
right?
okay,
There's
okay.
not, you know what I mean? Like we're all shades of gray for the most part. Yeah.
So,
And there are
oh, go
people
on.
that have a very I mean, I have a strict ethical code. I wrote it for myself. That's like one of the things we teach in Way of the Weaver, is to write, because there's really not a scripture for how to do this stuff. So, we teach people to write their own code of honor. And so I live by my ethical code. And there are a lot of people in the world that think that acts that could potentially be seen as manipulative, such as, I'll just, like the worst one, like cursing someone. There are people that that is very much off the table. Like they will not dabble in that whatsoever. And then there are others that don't see any problems with that, and it's actually part of their practice, right? So for example, where I live in the southern United States, there is a really big hoodoo and root worker tradition, and a lot of those things have to do with cursing magics, protection magics, things that people might look at it and be like, is that morally ethical? But when you think about it, those types of magics developed in communities that were so marginalized, they had no other recourse. They were not supported in a cultural context, a social context. The judicial system was often against them. So that's how those things develop. So, that's why I say it's kind of gray. You have to kind
Yeah.
of you kind of have to lift the lid and peer a little further into what's going
Yeah.
on.
So, being a stereotypical Christian, we have our specific traditions, Easter, Christmas, etc. Are there any specific traditions within paganism?
Oh yeah, absolutely. What people often refer to that as the wheel of the year, and there are certain time points on the wheel of the year that really have to do with astrological events for the most part. You've got like the summer solstice and the winter solstice. You've got the vernal equinox and the autumnal equinox. Those are all really big times where most of us that work with magic feel like perhaps the veil is a little bit thinner between seen and unseen, and we can maybe tap into that current of magic a bit easier. May Day is another big one for a lot of folks. Samhain, or what most people would call Halloween, or All Saints Day, All Souls Day, that time period. All of those, they have a lot of power, and a lot of pagans will honor and recognize those, as well as, I told you, like, some folks do try to do like a reconstructionist viewpoint, and so they will research ancient Roman festivals or ancient Greek festivals or things like that, and they'll celebrate those days as well.
Okay. Would you say that there's any what's the word, misconceptions? So I've kind of said, look, I'm naive. I want to learn about paganism. Please tell me about it. But is there like do some people kind of point at you with misconceptions to go, oh, you're going to do this, you're going to do that? And if so, can you name some that you've not already
Well,
mentioned?
yeah, I think, for me, and again, like, keep in mind, I was a Christian for many, many years. I mean, I was baptized in the church. That's my background. I have great respect for all the world religions. I'm just lucky enough to find something that is really meaningful for me. I think that there is a common misconception that all pagans worship the devil, all witches are, consorting with Satan, like, sort of like the like the witch panic of like the late 80s and early 90s really hasn't faded. That's still kind of around sometimes. And certainly myself, like my patron deity being Hades, I get that a lot. And I think that, as far as misconceptions go, that's probably one of the big ones. And then we also talked about, like, well, what do you do? Because there's no scripture, there's no rules. Like, how do you have ethics? And, I think, that kind of works in there too. A lot of, like, most pagans I know have an ethical code that they operate
Yeah.
by. They just have
And
determined it for themselves.
right, right. And it's weird, like, but yeah, I'm from England originally, and we've got some pretty dark history, and we have a similar kind of history to what was happening in Salem in the 1600s. And let's face it, in this day and age, if they have the same principles, it would be okay if you can float. Yeah, you're a witch and all this kind of stuff, and it's like
Right,
yeah,
right.
yeah, and it's like how times have changed. So if you could change one thing for paganism so that people understood it more, what would that be?
I think just more inclusion, especially in the United States. Majority of the people that live here, prescribe to some form of Christianity. That's the dominant religion here. Followed by the other Abrahamic religions too. Muslims, Jewish people. Um, I think it would be beneficial to not only for pagans like myself, but for the indigenous stewards of this land that were here before America was colonized, to recognize more belief systems and sort of try to work that in to ceremony. For example, if somebody is opening a new building, there might be a prayer that's offered. Can we include multiple types of prayer so that it if you've never heard anything, if you've never seen it in action, it feels unapproachable and scary. But if you normalize it, then it's not so scary, right? Right.
Good.
So I think inclusion is probably the big one that I would say.
Okay. So the reason why I've actually got you here, you wrote an article for Haunted Magazine, which
Yes.
I think is one of the best magazines out there. But a lot of it's in England, so I'm biased. But you wrote an article, "How to Clear, Ward, and Protect Spaces Like a Witch." So if we can go through some of the points that you mentioned, and then you can kind of explain.
Sure.
So you mentioned fumigation. I hope I say this right. Lustration and sound and movement. So can you explain how you come to that for me, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, you're working with those subtle energies. So this is to if a space is off or you suspect that there are some entities or spirits that are hanging around that maybe aren't welcome. This is a way to kind of clear that space and for a reset. So fumigation is basically sacred smoke. It's been called a lot of different things, and I will get on my soapbox because I do this every time. Please don't call it smudging. Smudging is a very specific practice among certain indigenous people. And if they choose to teach you, that's wonderful. But if you've not learned from an indigenous elder, please don't call it smudging. So I'll get off my soapbox.
Okay,
But it doesn't mean that we can't do it. I mean, people have used smoke to cleanse for millennia, probably, as long as we've had fire. When I do it, I like to use certain herbs that I know work really well for this. And it kind of depends on what's happening too, whether it's a situation where someone just feels stagnant energy in the home, like, it's just kind of stuck, or if it's a situation where someone's scared, I would use different herbs for that, right? I'll pick out kind of the ally that suits that. Basically, you want to have like a fire safe device that you can hold in your hand. Like this is where that cauldron comes in, like a small metal cauldron, or something like that, that is, going to be, fireproof, that you can kind of carry from room to room and basically just waft the smoke, just fumigate the smoke with, and speak the intention of, as I move, as this smoke floats through the room is clear, the room is clear, and just kind of, that's fumigation. Very simple. Lustration is almost the same, only with water.
the complete
So
opposites.
you can, yeah. But it's the same idea and really kind of the same protocol as well, right? So I prepare herbal waters, but you can certainly just do it with a little bit of spring water or even with a little bit of salt water works really well. And again, you want to have like a little bowl and something that you can sprinkle with. A sprig of rosemary works really well for this. Rosemary is a very good space cleanser, and you just dip it in the water and you move from room to room, and you're just sprinkling, with that intention of clearing the room. And the other really common way to clear a space is through sound. And this one I will often use if there is something that's very disturbing in a space, because just kind of the using sound, I like to make a big ruckus, like basically get pots and pans, bang them together as hard as you can. If you have a multi-story environment, you want to start at the top, move to the bottom, and if you can, if it's safe, have the doors and windows open while you're doing this. And you just want to make as loud a ruckus as you can and just, kind of yell like, you're not welcome here, you're not welcome here. And, just bang, 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 and get everything, closets, cabinets, get everything you have and just, get it all out of there. And then using sound too is a really nice reset. So you could combo these techniques, right? So say you want to fumigate with a little bit of rosemary or something, and so you waft your smoke around. And then, you definitely want to kind of, you're clearing something out, you're creating a vacuum. So you want to make sure that you're, setting it back properly. And there's not just a vacuum there for more stuff to come in, right? So you might use like that's where sound you can use it in a smaller way, like a small bell or a small chime. You kind of like walk through, like after you've cleansed it, you're sort of consecrating it for, the people that are living there or the activities that go on there, to give them a fresh start. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And is that for the sound and movement? Is that the same? Like I've seen a couple of TV shows where they've got like a metal bowl and they're going around the edge of the bowl. Is that the same kind of principle?
Yeah, a singing bowl. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that wasn't the only part of this particular article. You talk about warding of space as well. So this has got 2 points to it. I'm probably going to say this completely wrong, but I'm sure you'll correct me. Protective sigils, and
Sigils.
then
Sigils.
sigil.
Yeah.
Okay, and then your magical barriers. So if you can explain about those two for me, please.
So again, because we were talking, like we just spoke about clearing, right? And so you don't want to create a vacuum. Once you've got things cleared out, you want to protect the space. Sigils are, they are basically little symbols that represent things, and they come in many different forms. You would be familiar with one. The cross is like an early sigil of protection. Either the cross as we know it in Christianity, or an X has also been used for protection for millennia. Sigils. You can use runes, like Norse runes. You can use those as sigils. Many pagans are very fond of using the pentagram, the five-pointed star, as a
Yeah.
protective sigil. So what those are, they're basically acting on the subtle plane, as like, if it's almost as if you wrote a sign that says, "This home is protected, do not enter." Only you're doing it in an energetic way. So basically, to do, for example, what I do at my own home is I move around each window and door in my home, and I like to use water and draw a sigil. I usually use the pentagram on each of those spaces. And so I'm basically putting that "do not enter" sign for every entrance in my house. And you can, I mean, again, this is not something that, if, for example, like if you are a Christian and you want to use this, use the cross and speak a prayer and do it at all your windows, right? It will still work in the same way. It's all about the intention, and having done it and like laid it down. So
And I've seen again on TV, and it's in color, so it must be real. When I've seen examples of where they've put, I'm assuming it's a sigil at each corner of the house on the outside. Is that the same kind of
yeah,
thing for
yeah,
warding your space?
exactly. Yeah, exactly the same concept of warding a space. I have like a physical way of warding my space that I really like. I mentioned hoodoo, the magic of the South, and in hoodoo, one of the things that you protect your house with are railroad spikes, like old iron
Yeah,
railroad spikes. And so
that's what I
in
saw.
each corner of my house, I've driven a railroad spike into the ground. Another old, and again, like, coming from England, you know that the iron's supposed to protect you against fairies too.
Yeah,
I don't know, if you want fairies in your garden, you may not want to use the iron railroad spikes. But another, like from Appalachia, that region of the United States, an old method for warding a space is to take 9 needles, like needles or straight pins that you'd use for sewing, and to place them almost like a little barrier across your driveway, so that only the people you want to come in can come in. So yeah, there's like physical ways of warding.
yeah. It's a shame that I'm interviewing you now, because a few weekends ago I was actually talking to somebody about fairies, so we could have crossed over, and I'd like, yeah. Okay, so the 5 natural allies for paranormal protection. If you could talk about each one of those for me, please.
Well, you have to remind me because I don't have the article in front of me right now.
So, Jamie, I just thought it would be off the top of your head. So,
Well, I actually work with a lot of herbs, and so I for the article I picked like 5 that are
yeah.
pretty easy for people to find if they want to use them, and that are pretty
Okay.
accessible. So you'll have to remind
Oh,
me.
okay. Just this once, okay? I'm not remind you about anything else. Okay. So the first one is mugwort.
Yeah, mugwort is fantastic. It is such a go-to. And it has been, again, used for many, many years to protect spaces and also to protect like animals, like cows and horses and things like that. Mugwort it's very easy to find. It burns. It has like kind of a similar effect as sage, as like white sage. Yeah, and it's a very good. It's been mentioned in there's an Old Norse poem about the magical herbs of protection, and mugwort is one of those that's listed in it. So, and I think, kind of like anything else, like if something has been used for a particular purpose for a very long time, that just adds to its power. You're just sort of like you keep like honing it, like like you would like a sharp implement, like the usage just kind of continues and adds to what it can do. Yeah. So
Okay.
mugwort's a big one.
Okay. So the next few I've actually heard of. So yeah, great. Rosemary is the next one on the list.
Yeah, rosemary's great. It's great for kind of clearing out energies and spirits in a more gentler way. I think mugwort's it's a little harsher, and rosemary's a little softer. It's also great where if you just want to clear your personal energy, like just your, if you want to incorporate, sort of like a rosemary scent or a rosemary like body wash or something like that. It's kind of great for your person. And it's also very protective against nightmares, which can be really, really good. So you want to put a sprig of rosemary above your bed, or you can even put it under your bed. It will help with that.
Interesting. Next time I have a nightmare, I'll try rosemary. Okay. Okay. So Jupiter is the next one, not the
Oh,
planet. The
juniper. Yeah,
yeah.
juniper. Yeah,
Well, okay.
juniper
Typo.
is
Typo. Definitely a typo
that's
because it says
okay. No,
Jupiter.
juniper. Yeah, yeah, I have juniper bushes in my yard. Juniper is some again, just kind of like mugwort, again, coming from sort of the area of the world that my ancestors came from, which is England, Scotland, Wales. There was often people would burn juniper branches at certain points in the year. They would drive their cattle between them to sort of cleanse and protect their cattle. They would burn juniper in the home to sort of fumigate the whole home. It's just, and also it smells really good when it's burning. And, if you've noticed something about all of these things, like mugwort and especially juniper and rosemary, they have sort of a tang, like an astringent sort of quality to the smell. And that's on purpose, right? That's something that will sort of shake up energy and move it along. It's not like you're burning rose petals, right?
Yeah, yeah, for
That's
sure.
like a more welcoming sort of thing. You want that little tang. You want to cleanse.
Okay, and number 4 on the list, another one I've heard of. Yay, yay for me, is blackberry.
Blackberry. Yeah, I have blackberry brambles that grow all around my house. So if you think about it, blackberry is very thorny. And so using blackberry, I use that more as a protective type of herb because it can, literally provide a barrier around somewhere, right? So if I were using this on a home, I mean, I have wild blackberry in my yard, which I let grow because it's great, great protection. But if I were using this on someone's home, I would probably make a tea of blackberry, and we would do sort of that method I taught you about the sigils. We would kind of use that blackberry tea in the same manner, because you're not only putting a protective sign there, you're doubling up because you're using the herb too. And if you just think about it, I mean, blackberries are delicious, but how many of us have like ended up with scratches you
Oh,
know all
100%.
over it? Yeah, it's really something that will really, it's like, don't come in here, don't. It's almost like a barbed fence, right?
Cool. Okay, and the last one, Samphor.
Camphor. Yeah.
Okay,
Camphor is
Samphor.
the heavy artillery.
Okay.
This is for energies or spirits that are very stubborn and really won't leave, or they're getting a little ugly and aggressive with you. Camphor, I don't know if you've ever smelled Vicks Vapor Rub, like
Oh
the
yes,
salve that you
yeah,
rub on your chest.
yeah.
That's camphor, like that smell. And you know what that does to your sinuses, right? Like it opens them up, totally like clears them out. Camphor actually comes in little white blocks. And if you're going to use it, I would say don't start with camphor, okay? Like, start with rosemary, work your way up to camphor. Okay. Like, you just, camphor is very smelly, and you want to be very careful about burning it because it can really irritate like the sinuses and the lungs if you're not careful. But yeah, that's a heavy hitter for when you've got a really serious situation. And again, going back to the hoodoo tradition, hoodoo and root work is very practical. And so I know practitioners that will actually just take the Vicks Vapor Rub and like run their finger in it and run their finger along door frames for protection. Yeah, which is,
Oh
I
wow,
think,
that's
quite
crazy.
brilliant, actually.
Yeah, yeah. So that, I'm going to go out and get some tonight. So like,
Yeah,
go
you
for it.
should. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
like, that's
yeah,
brilliant. Use what you have
yeah,
around. I think people imagine witches having these like beautiful cabinets full of like jars and things like that. You can get rosemary at the grocery store. Like,
yeah,
it's not. There's a certain aesthetic that you see on Instagram or TikTok, but and some of us have that aesthetic, but
yeah.
some of us are very practical.
Next time I go to the store and see someone buying rosemary, it's sort of like, are you an
What?
alchemist? Are you like, yeah.
Yeah. You
So
might just be making it. You might be making roast chicken. You might be fumigating a home. We don't know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So would you actually call yourself an alchemist? Because you've mentioned about all these different like herbs and what to do with them and how to protect you, but alchemy kind of comes into that under that umbrella as well. So would you actually call yourself an alchemist?
I think that there are certain parts of alchemy that I use for sure. Most of the time, I call myself an esoteric herbalist because I study plants so much, but I'm using them in the esoteric or the magical manner. To me, alchemy has a lot more precision than what I do. There's a lot about like planetary hours and times of the day and particular metals. And um, I tend to just kind of, like we said, be very practical about what I'm doing, especially because I'm teaching so much, right? And when I'm teaching, you want to give people like solutions that are easy for them, that they can access and that they can perform themselves. And I really admire alchemists. They are incredibly smart individuals. And I was certainly there's always a little bit of alchemy to magic, right? If you think about the old alchemists that are trying to turn lead into gold, that's what you're doing a lot of times. You're trying to turn something that's not a scenario you want, or a situation that's going on, into something better, and you're kind of using magic to do that. And maybe you're using plant allies, maybe you're using mineral allies. But yeah, I don't really call myself that, but I think there's definitely elements of alchemy going on.
Okay. Okay, so unfortunately, and I could talk about this all day. We haven't mentioned Harry Potter much, so we should go back there. But um, I know that you've released some books and you've had your own documentary. So, if you want to first boost your books, by all means mention what books you've written. But then I'd also like you to tell me what's next for Jamie Wagner.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Actually, I'm enjoying myself too. I wish we could keep
Yeah,
talking.
yeah.
Um, so the book that just came out in 2024, that's Hades. I have it right here. It's Hades, Myth, Magic, and Modern Devotion. So if you're interested in the Greek god of the underworld, I have put a book together about sort of how I got to work with Hades and what I understand about him and his mythology. He's a mysterious character. You have to really turn over a lot of rocks to like find out more about him. And so I put all that together in the book. And also there's a lot of magic in there too. So if you're curious about cleansing, warding, casting a circle, making a condenser, which is basically what I talked about, sort of the herbal tea, like planning a ritual, those types of things. All of that's in here, which I think is applicable for many situations, even if you're not interested in Hades. Currently, well, I'm also part of the Feminine Macabre, which is how I got in Haunted Magazine. So, the Feminine Macabre is a series of journals of the paranormal that is written by all women or non binary individuals. And I think they are on Journal 7 right now. I have an essay on scrying in Journal 4. But those are really great. So check those out. My friend Amanda Wilmer puts those out, and she is absolutely fantastic. And I'm see what is coming up next. those are the books that are out right now. What's coming up next is that I am starting in August. I'm doing my River Styx book club again. Like the one we have right now is just wrapping up. I basically take people chapter by chapter through the book, and we do all the exercises together, and we have group discussions, and I even throw in some other stuff that didn't quite make it into the book. And we have a lot of fun. So that group is starting up again on August 6th and runs through early December. And there are lots of details about it on my website. That's how you can find out all the info. And with Way of the Weaver, our classes are always ongoing. There's always something going on. Right now, let's see, we're in May. We have a what we call Weaver Camp in June. I don't know when this episode will post. It might be over by then, but it's basically a 4-day retreat for adults, and we do a lot of magic and ritual at that. And we also have what we call Spider Threads, which is our longer program over that takes place over about 5 months, and we teach you sort of in depth and in person how to basically how to start your magical practice and how to deepen that, and some intermediate to advanced skills that you don't find a lot of other places. And as far as writing goes, right now I'm writing kind of a sequel to Hades, but it's kind of a standalone book. The working title is called One Foot in the Underworld, and it expands out and talks a lot more about all of the other gods, demigods, characters that live in the underworld, and also with the magical practices around the threshold between living and dying, and working with that liminal space. So
I'm going to be looking at the website for the rest of the night now, going, oh yeah, I need to order that book. I need to do this, and I need to do.
yeah, I'm
Jamie,
really excited. Yeah, I'm really
it's
excited. And then like way down the road, I'm also I've started working on an underworld tarot deck. It's based on the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot, so it's a 78 card deck, but it's all the Greek underworld. But that is, I mean, it takes a while for an artist to make 78 cards. So
so
yeah,
when
so
do,
that's a little further down the road.
when do you hope that'll be finished by?
Oh
Optimistically,
gosh. Optimistically, well, the next book, One Foot in the Underworld, is probably going to be coming out next year in 2026. I think that the tarot deck will be either in 2027 or very early 2028. It kind of depends on my publisher's schedule.
and the artist, obviously, because he's like
Yeah.
say, to all these
Yeah.
little cards that he's got to draw.
Yep,
Jamie,
exactly. Exactly. It's a lot of work.
yeah, Jamie, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned so much. I want to learn more, so I'm definitely going to be going out and buying your book and be having a good read. Yay, you got another
Yeah.
subscriber.
Well,
But
if you buy one from my website, I'll sign it for you and I'll send you some stickers and everything. So you get a nice little care package from the underworld in the mail.
I, how could I refuse that? Come on, let's face it. Yeah, how could I? That I'll be looking at definitely looking at that this week. Definitely. Okay,
Yeah.
Jamie, it's been an absolute pleasure. I could talk to you all night. You've been absolutely fascinating. I thank you for your time, and
Yeah.
please come back if you ever want to have another chat about something else. Then we can definitely do that. So
Uh,
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I would love to, Lee. It was really a pleasure. Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.